In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, most warriors pray for the mercy of forgetting. Space Marine dreadnoughts, those walking tombs of metal and legend, gradually lose their memories over centuries of service. Their minds fade like old photographs left too long in the sun, until they become little more than war machines that dream of battles they can no longer quite recall. This forgetting is considered a blessing, a small mercy granted to those who have sacrificed everything to continue serving the Emperor beyond death. But for the dreadnoughts of the Thousand Suns, there is no such mercy. Where their loyalist counterparts slowly drift into comfortable forgetfulness, the sons of Magnus the Red remember everything with crystalline, agonizing clarity. Every battle, every face, every spell cast, and every brother lost. The psychic modifications that once made them the greatest sorcerers in the galaxy now serve as chains, binding their consciousness to perfect, eternal awareness within shells of blessed adamantium and corrupted ceramite. This is their curse, their punishment, and perhaps the cruelest joke that Tsiench, the changer of ways, has ever played upon his most devoted servants. To understand the horror of what the Thousand Suns dreadnoughts endure, we must first understand what it means to be a normal dreadnought. In the Imperium of mankind, when a space marine suffers wounds so catastrophic that even their superhuman biology cannot save them, but their will to serve remains unbroken, they are given what is considered the highest honor. Their broken body is interred within a dreadnought sarcophagus, a massive walking weapons platform that becomes their new form. They are connected to the machine through a mind impulse unit, a neural interface that allows them to control the dreadnought's weapons and limbs as if they were their own flesh. But this honor comes at a terrible price. The Space Marine can no longer feel the world around them. They exist in a cold, numb void, suspended in amniotic fluids that sustain what little remains of their organic body. They cannot taste food, cannot feel the warmth of the sun, cannot touch their brother's hands in fellowship. All of these simple human experiences are stripped away, replaced by the cold efficiency of machine senses and targeting reticules. For most dreadnoughts, the psychological toll is immense. They experience crushing isolation, separated from their brothers, not just by layers of ceramite and adamantium, but by the fundamental disconnect between flesh and machine. The chapters of the Adeptus Astartes deal with this in the kindest way they know how. Between battles, dreadnoughts are placed in stasis, essentially frozen in time until they are needed again. These periods of sleep can last for decades, centuries, or even millennia, and during these long sleeps, something merciful happens. The human mind, even one as enhanced and conditioned as a space Marines, begins to let go. Memories fade, details blur, names and faces become harder to recall. The dreadnought who awakens after a century of sleep is not quite the same warrior who went into stasis. They are still mighty, still dangerous, still devoted to the Emperor, but pieces of who they were have quietly slipped away into darkness. This gradual erosion of memory is not considered a failure or a tragedy by most chapters. Instead, it is seen as a natural part of the dreadnought's existence, perhaps even a gift from the Emperor himself. The ancient heroes who have served for thousands of years are revered not despite their failing memories, but in some ways because of them. They have become living relics, bridges to a past that no longer needs to be remembered in perfect detail. They carry the essence of their chapter's history without being crushed by the weight of every individual moment. They are venerable precisely because they have transcended the burden of total recall. Bjorn the Fell-Handed, the oldest dreadnought in the Imperium, has served the Space Wolves for over 10,000 years. He fought alongside Leman Russ himself during the Great Crusade and witnessed the horrors of the Horus Heresy firsthand. Yet even Bjorn, whose wisdom is sought by chapter masters and whose words carry the weight of ages, admits that his memories have become like old sagas, vivid in some places, but hazy in others. He remembers the important moments, the crucial lessons, the defining battles. But the day-to-day details, the faces of brothers who fell millennia ago, the specific words spoken before battles long won or lost, these have faded into the comfortable blur of deep time. This is normal. This is expected. This is, in its own way, kind. The Thousand Suns, Dreadnoughts, have no such comfort. To understand why requires us to journey back to the days before the heresy, to the time when the Thousand Suns Legion was still loyal to the Emperor, and their Primarch Magnus the Red was considered one of the greatest minds in the entire Imperium. The Thousand Suns had always been different from other Space Marine legions. Where most legions produced warriors first and foremost, the 15th Legion created scholar warriors, Space Marines who were as comfortable with ancient texts and psychic theory as they were with bolters and chainswords. The gene seed of Magnus the Red carried within it a potent psychic gift, and nearly every member of the Thousand Suns possessed some degree of psychic ability. This gift, however, came with a terrible curse. The Thousand Suns suffered from a genetic flaw known as the flesh change, a horrific condition that caused uncontrolled mutation. Without warning, a Thousand Suns warrior might suddenly begin to mutate, their flesh warping and changing into something monstrous and unrecognizable. Some grew extra limbs or eyes, others saw their bones twist into impossible configurations. Many simply dissolved into puddles of screaming protoplasm. The flesh change was random, terrifying, and seemingly unstoppable. It hung over the Legion like a death sentence, never knowing which brother would be struck down next. Magnus spent decades searching for a cure, delving into forbidden lore and striking bargains he did not fully understand. Eventually, he found a way to stabilize his sons, though the price paid to Tzeentch, the chaos god of change and sorcery, would ultimately prove catastrophic. But in those early days, when the Thousand Suns were still loyal and their Primarch had not yet learned the full extent of his folly, Magnus turned his brilliant mind to solving another problem that plagued his legion. Space Marines who were wounded badly enough to require dreadnought interment were common in all legions. But when a Thousand Suns warrior with psychic powers was so grievously injured, they faced a unique horror. The process of being wired into a dreadnought's systems involved extensive neural integration, connecting the Space Marine's consciousness directly to the machine through cybernetic implants and psychic resonance matrices. For a psyker, this process was agonizing and often fatal. The psychic energies that a sorcerer naturally channeled would interact catastrophically with the dreadnought's systems. Some aspirants simply died during the process, their minds unable to survive the trauma of being severed from their bodies, while their psychic abilities raged out of control. Others survived the interment only to descend into immediate madness, their powers turning inward and tearing their consciousness apart from within. Still others experienced malign psychic phenomena, their dreadnoughts becoming haunted by warp entities or suffering unpredictable surges of empiric energy that could devastate friend and foe alike. For many solar decades, the arts by which the power of an Astartes psyker could be maintained medically within the armored sarcophagus of a dreadnought eluded not just the Thousand Suns, but any legion that tried. The problem was deceptively simple on the surface. A psyker's abilities were fundamentally tied to their living, organic brain and their connection to the warp. When that brain was reduced to a fragment of its former self and encased in lifeless metal, that connection became unstable at best and catastrophically dangerous at worst. The psychic power had nowhere to ground itself, no organic matter through which to properly channel. It would build up like electricity, seeking a path to Earth, until it either consumed the psyker's consciousness or exploded outward in devastating displays of uncontrolled warp energy. Magnus the Red, being Magnus the Red, refused to accept that his most powerful warriors had to choose between death and abandoning their gifts. He applied his formidable intellect to the problem, approaching it not as a limitation to work around, but as a puzzle with a solution waiting to be discovered. If the issue was that psychic energy had nowhere to properly channel within the confines of a dreadnought sarcophagus, then the answer was to create a structure that could safely contain and direct that energy. He needed something that could act as a psychic barrier and amplifier simultaneously, protecting the dreadnought systems from the Psyker's power while also allowing that power to be used effectively in battle. The result of his work was the Osiren device, named after the ancient god of the dead and rebirth. The Osiren was a masterwork of psychic and technological engineering, a crown of psychometric barrier lattice that would be placed directly onto the Psyker's living brain within the sarcophagus. It was incredibly difficult to construct, requiring materials and techniques that even the most learned tech priests and psi arcanists barely understood. The lattice had to be precisely calibrated to each individual Psyker, tuned to resonate with their specific psychic signature. One mistake in its construction or installation could result in the death of the aspirant or, worse, their transformation into something that was neither fully alive nor mercifully dead. But when it worked, the Osiren device performed its function beautifully. It created a stable psychometric field around the Psyker's consciousness, a carefully maintained bubble of psychic stability that allowed them to continue using their powers even while interred in a dreadnought. The device acted as a filter and a focus, taking the raw psychic energy generated by the sorcerer's mind and channeling it through the dreadnought systems in a controlled manner. Thousand Suns, Psykers who underwent the Osiren treatment, could cast spells from within their armored shells, wielding force weapons with the same psychic might they had possessed in life, manipulating the battlefield with telekinetic powers, and even communing with the warp to divine future events or gather intelligence. The Osiren pattern. Contemptor dreadnoughts, as they came to be known, were devastating weapons of war. They combined the raw firepower and durability of a standard dreadnought with the psychic might of a Thousand Suns sorcerer, creating a synergy that made them some of the most feared war machines in the Great Crusade. A single Osiren dreadnought could turn the tide of a battle, its force blade cleaving through enemy tanks while its psychic powers struck down distant foes with bolts of warp lightning. They were mobile fortresses of destruction, each one containing a warrior of immense knowledge and power. Magnus, in a display of the generosity and naivety that would ultimately contribute to his downfall, shared the schematics for the Osiren device with all of the other Space Marine legions. He believed that every legion should have the ability to preserve their psykers in this way. That knowledge should be shared for the betterment of all. Most legions rejected the gift entirely, either out of distrust of anything related to psychic powers, or simply because they had so few psykers that the effort required to construct Osiren devices was not worth the investment. Only the Blood Angels are known to have made significant use of the technology, developing their own librarian dreadnoughts based on similar principles, though whether they used the exact Oseron design or developed their own variation remains unclear. The Grey Knights, created much later and from the gene seed of the Emperor himself, would eventually field their own Psyker dreadnoughts, though by that time the Thousand Suns had long since fallen to chaos, and the Osiren device existed only as a memory of what had been. What Magnus could not have known when he created the Osiren device, what perhaps even his vast intellect and psychic foresight could not have predicted, was that he was creating a form of prison far more inescapable than any conventional dreadnought sarcophagus. The very mechanism that allowed Thousand Suns psykers to maintain their powers also ensured that they would maintain their memories. The psychometric barrier lattice that protected their minds from the ravages of the dreadnought interface also protected them from the merciful erosion of time. It kept their consciousness sharp, clear, and terrifyingly aware. Where a normal dreadnought pilot's mind would gradually fog with age and inactivity, their memories becoming dreamlike and indistinct, the Osiren-equipped Thousand Suns sorcerers remained in a state of perfect psychic clarity. Their minds, encased in the protective field generated by the barrier lattice, did not fade or blur. They remained as sharp as the day they were interred, perhaps even sharper, as the Osiren device seemed to enhance certain aspects of psychic consciousness while preserving it. Every moment of their existence was recorded with perfect fidelity in their psychically enhanced memory, unable to be forgotten, unable to be softened by the passage of time. This might have been bearable if the Thousand Sons had continued on their original path, if they had remained loyal to the Emperor and fought in the Great Crusade as honored warriors. But fate and the machinations of Tzeentch had other plans. The Council of Nicaea, where the Emperor banned the use of psychic powers among the legions, marked the beginning of the end for the Thousand Sons. Magnus, desperate to warn his father of Horus's impending betrayal, broke through the psychic wards protecting the Imperial Palace, inadvertently destroying the Emperor's secret webway project and condemning himself and his legion to damnation. The Space Wolves, acting on the Emperor's orders but manipulated by darker forces, descended upon Prospero in terrible fury. The burning of Prospero was a catastrophe. The Thousand Sons Dreadnoughts fought with desperate valor, their psychic powers blazing as they tried to stem the tide of Space Wolves and their Custodes allies. But they were too few, and the enemy too many. The world that had been their home, the beautiful city of Tizca, with its great libraries and pyramids of knowledge, was reduced to burning rubble. The Thousand Sons who survived fled into the Eye of Terror with their broken Primarch, refugees from the Imperium they had once proudly served. And there, in the Eye of Terror, the true horror began. The Thousand Sons Dreadnoughts, who had survived Prospero, found themselves in a realm where time had no meaning, where the laws of physics were mere suggestions, and where the warp pressed in on all sides. They witnessed their Legion brothers begin to succumb to the flesh change once more, saw the mutations that Magnus's bargain with Tzeentch had merely delayed finally coming to claim their due. They watched as their Primarch retreated into bitter isolation, consumed by rage and shame at what he had inadvertently caused. And they could do nothing to help, trapped in their metal shells, unable to interact with their brothers except as weapons of war. Then came the rubric of Ahriman, and with it, a fate that many Thousand Sons Dreadnoughts would later consider worse than death. Ahriman, the chief librarian and most powerful sorcerer of the Legion after Magnus himself, had watched his brothers succumb to mutation with growing desperation. He delved into forbidden tomes and ancient grimoires, searching for a way to save the Legion from the flesh change once and for all. Eventually, he devised a mighty spell, a working of sorcery so ambitious that it required the combined power of the most powerful sorcerers in the Legion to cast. The rubric of Ahriman was meant to freeze the Thousand Sons in their current state, to make them immune to the ravages of mutation. In this, it succeeded beyond Ahriman's wildest expectations, but the price was terrible beyond imagining. Every Thousand Sons warrior who lacked strong psychic powers found their physical body reduced to dust in an instant. Their souls were bound into their power armor, trapped within sealed suits of ceramite for eternity. They became the rubric Marines, animated armor empty of everything but the faintest psychic echo of who they had once been. They were automata, capable of following orders and fighting with perfect discipline, but bereft of independent thought, personality, or will. The Thousand Sons who survived as thinking beings were only those with powerful psychic abilities, a few hundred sorcerers who now had to command entire legions of their own hollowed-out brothers. The Thousand Sons Dreadnoughts, protected by their Osiren devices and possessed of significant psychic power, survived the rubric with their consciousness intact. But they did not emerge unscathed. They felt the moment when the spell washed over them, felt the psychometric barrier lattice around their minds flare with energy as it filtered and deflected the worst of the rubric's effects. They felt the souls of their brothers wink out like candles in a hurricane hundreds upon hundreds of warriors they had known for centuries, simply ceasing to exist as thinking beings in a single terrible moment. And they remembered. Unlike normal dreadnoughts, who would have perhaps retained a general sense of loss, but whose memories of specific fallen brothers would fade with time, the Osiren-equipped sorcerers remembered every single one. They could recall their names, their faces, their voices, their personalities. They remembered conversations from decades past, remembered the specific jokes brothers had told, remembered the individual quirks and habits that had made each warrior unique. All of that was preserved in perfect detail by the psychometric barrier lattice, unchanging and unchangeable. The psychological impact was staggering. Imagine carrying the memory of everyone you've ever known who died, holding those memories with the same vivid clarity as if they had died yesterday, year after year, century after century, with no hope of the pain ever dulling. For the Thousand Suns dreadnoughts, this became their reality. They did not have the mercy of forgetting. They could not retreat into the comfortable haze that eventually claims all normal dreadnoughts. Every loss was fresh. Every failure was immediate. Every mistake was as vivid as the moment it happened. Magnus, when he finally emerged from his seclusion and saw what Ahriman's spell had wrought, was consumed with rage. He banished Ahriman and his cabal from Sortiarius, the planet of the sorcerers that had become the Thousand Suns' new home. But the damage was done, and no amount of anger could undo it. The Legion was shattered, reduced to a fraction of its former strength. And the Dreadnoughts, those ancient warriors who had survived so much already, found themselves in a new role, caretakers of memory, living witnesses to the tragedy that had befallen their Legion. In the millennia since the rubric, the Thousand Suns Dreadnoughts have become something unique in the galaxy. They are not the revered ancient warriors of loyalist chapters, dispensing wisdom from the perspective of ages, nor are they the rage-filled hellbrutes that other traitor legions field, mindless engines of destruction driven mad by their imprisonment. Instead, they exist in a strange middle ground, simultaneously blessed and cursed by their perfect retention of consciousness. They remember the glory days before the heresy, when the Thousand Suns were respected as some of the finest warriors and scholars in the Imperium. They remember Prospero before its burning, the great libraries filled with knowledge accumulated from across the galaxy, the pyramids of glass that caught and reflected the sun in dazzling displays of color. They remember the sense of brotherhood that existed before the rubric, when their fellow warriors were living, breathing men with hopes and dreams and ambitions of their own. All of this is as clear to them as if it happened yesterday, and all of it serves only to make their current existence more painful, because they also remember everything that came after. They remember the horror of the burning of Prospero in excruciating detail. Every building that fell, every brother who died screaming, every spell cast in desperate defense, every moment of the battle preserved perfectly in their psychically enhanced memories. They remember the slow disintegration of the Legion in the Eye of Terror, watching helplessly as their brothers succumbed to mutation. They remember the instant the rubric was cast, the sensation of thousands of souls being extinguished simultaneously, like stars going dark across the firmament of the warp. And they remember every battle they have fought in the 10,000 years since, every enemy slain, every world conquered or razed, every scheme of Tzinch they have been used to advance, every moment of every war recorded with perfect clarity, layered one upon another in a palimpsest of violence that would drive any normal mind to madness. But they cannot go mad, because the Osiren device keeps their consciousness stable and clear. They cannot forget, because the psychometric barrier lattice preserves their memories intact. They can only remember and endure and continue to serve. This perfect memory has given the Thousand Suns Dreadnoughts a strange kind of power. They are walking libraries of tactical knowledge, repositories of information about battles fought across 10 millennia. When a Thousand Suns warband engages an enemy, the Dreadnoughts can recall with perfect accuracy every previous encounter with that foe, their tactics, their weaknesses, the methods that have proven most effective against them. They are invaluable strategic assets, their counsel sought by sorcerer lords who recognize that the ancient warriors possess knowledge that even the most extensive archives cannot match. But this power comes at a price. The Dreadnoughts are also repositories of failure and loss. They remember every battle that went wrong, every plan that failed, every brother who fell due to mistakes made by the living. They carry the weight of 10,000 years of accumulated tragedy, unable to set any of it down, unable to forget even the most painful memories. For a normal Dreadnought, the merciful erosion of memory means that the worst moments eventually fade into general impressions of sorrow. For the Thousand Suns, every loss is fresh, every failure immediate and agonizing in its detail. Consider what this means in practical terms. A Space Wolves Dreadnought, who has served for 5,000 years, may remember that he fought against Chaos forces on some frozen world long ago, may remember that it was a hard battle and that brothers fell, but the specific details will have blurred. He might remember the name of his captain if pressed, might recall a few key tactical decisions, but the faces and voices of individual fallen warriors will have faded into a general sense of loss and respect for the dead. This is natural. This is how human memory, even enhanced human memory, is supposed to work. The mind cannot hold infinite detail indefinitely without breaking. But a Thousand Suns, Dreadnought who fought that same battle 5,000 years ago, remembers it as if it happened last week. He knows every fallen warrior's name. He can recall the exact words spoken before the battle, the specific sounds of battle brothers' voices raised in war cries. He remembers the precise moment each brother fell, can describe in excruciating detail the wounds that killed them. He knows what the weather was like, what the enemy formations looked like, what spells were cast and in what order. All of this information is preserved in perfect psychic clarity by the Osiren device, unavailable to be forgotten or softened by time. Now imagine carrying that level of detail, not just for one battle, but for thousands. Imagine every engagement you have ever fought in being equally clear and immediate in your memory. Imagine being able to recall with perfect accuracy the faces of every single battle brother you have lost over 10,000 years of service. Imagine the weight of all that accumulated loss, all those deaths, all that failure and sorrow, pressing down on your consciousness with undiminished force, year after year, century after century, millennium after millennium. This is what the Thousand Suns Dreadnoughts endure. This is their curse. They are trapped in an eternal present where the past never fades, where every moment of their long existence remains as vivid and real as the day it occurred. They are prisoners of their own perfect memories, unable to forget, unable to move on, unable to find peace in the comfortable haze that eventually claims their loyalist counterparts. The psychological strategies that work for normal Dreadnoughts simply do not function for the Thousand Suns. When a loyalist chapter places its Dreadnoughts in stasis between battles, those ancient warriors gradually lose their grasp on specific details. They sleep for a century and wake with their long-term memories intact, but their short-term memories faded. This allows them to maintain continuity of identity and purpose, while avoiding being crushed by the accumulated weight of remembering every single day of their existence. But the Thousand Suns Dreadnoughts do not truly sleep, not in any way that brings rest or forgetfulness. When they are placed in stasis, their consciousness does not fade into comfortable darkness. Instead, they enter a kind of psychic half-state, where their awareness dims, but never fully extinguishes. They exist in a strange limbo, conscious enough to experience the passage of time, but unable to interact with the world around them. It is a form of sensory deprivation torture that would break most minds, extended over decades or centuries. And because they exist within the eye of terror, where the warp presses close and time flows strangely, this stasis is not the peaceful hibernation that loyalist Dreadnoughts experience. The Thousand Suns Dreadnoughts report experiencing vivid psychic visions during stasis, nightmares drawn from the warp that are indistinguishable from memory. They relive past battles, but twisted and distorted by the influence of Tzeentch. They see alternate versions of events that might have been, futures that could still come to pass, and presents that exist only in the fever dreams of the changer of ways. All of this is processed by their perfectly preserved consciousness and stored in their psychically enhanced memory, alongside their actual experiences. When they finally emerge from stasis, called forth to battle once again, they must take time to sort through these psychic experiences and separate genuine memory from warp-spawned illusion. This would be challenging enough for a mortal psyker with years of training. For a consciousness that has been isolated in sensory deprivation for decades, while bombarded with visions from the warp, it is an exercise in maintaining sanity through sheer force of will. That the Thousand Suns Dreadnoughts managed to do this at all speaks to the incredible mental discipline required to be a sorcerer of their legion. That they must do it every time they wake speaks to the cruelty of their condition. The contrast with loyalist dreadnoughts becomes even more stark when we consider how memory affects purpose and motivation. A Space Wolf dreadnought, who has forgotten the specific details of his past life, can focus entirely on the present moment, on the current battle and the brothers fighting alongside him now. His purpose is clear and uncomplicated. Serve the chapter, protect the Imperium, honor the All-Father. He is not burdened by detailed memories of all the times he failed to protect, all the brothers he watched die, all the battles he fought that ultimately changed nothing in the grand scheme of an eternal war. But the Thousand Suns Dreadnoughts remember all of it. They remember every promise made and broken. They remember every oath sworn in the Emperor's name, back when they still believed in the Emperor's righteousness. They remember their own enthusiasm for the Great Crusade, the genuine belief they once held that they were building something better for humanity. And they remember the exact moments when that belief began to crumble, the specific conversations and events that led them to question everything they thought they knew. This creates a unique form of psychological suffering. The Thousand Suns. Dreadnoughts exist in a state of constant cognitive dissonance, simultaneously holding in their perfect memory who they once were and what they have become. They cannot forget that they were once loyal sons of the Imperium, warriors who fought to expand and protect humanity. They also cannot deny what they are now, servants of a chaos god, participants in a long war that has seen them commit countless atrocities in Tzeentch's name. The disconnect between these two realities would normally be resolved over time as memories fade and identity shifts. But for them, both realities remain equally clear and present, creating an eternal internal conflict that has no resolution. Some Thousand Suns. Dreadnoughts have tried to cope with this by retreating into pure intellectualism, treating their memories as data to be analyzed rather than experiences to be felt. They approach their own past with the detachment of a scholar studying ancient history, noting patterns and drawing conclusions, but trying not to engage emotionally with what they remember. This strategy has limited success. The psychometric barrier lattice that preserves their memories also preserves the emotional context associated with those memories. They can pretend to analyze objectively, but they still feel, with perfect clarity, every emotion they experienced in the moment being remembered. Others have thrown themselves fully into service to Tzeentch, embracing the changer of ways as the only constant in an existence defined by perfect memory of change and loss. If everything they believed in has been taken from them, if everyone they cared about has been reduced to dust or corrupted beyond recognition, if the very Imperium they once served has become the enemy they now fight, then perhaps the only truth is change itself. Perhaps Tzeentch's endless machinations and schemes are the only appropriate response to a universe where nothing is permanent and all loyalty is ultimately betrayed. This philosophy provides a framework for understanding their suffering, even if it does not alleviate it. Still others have simply endured, maintaining their identity and purpose through sheer force of will. These are perhaps the most tragic of all, because they most clearly remember who they once were and most keenly feel the distance between that past self and their current existence. They continue to serve not because they believe in the cause or find satisfaction in the service, but because they literally do not know how to do anything else. They have been warriors for so long, have fought in so many battles, have known nothing but war for so many millennia, that the idea of being anything else has become inconceivable. They persist because persistence is all they have left. The relationship between the Thousand Sons Dreadnoughts and the Rubric Marines presents another layer of psychological complexity. The Rubric Marines are hollow shells, animated by the faintest echoes of who they once were. They follow orders with perfect precision, but show no initiative, no creativity, no spark of life. They are weapons, not warriors, tools rather than brothers. To the living sorcerers who command them, the Rubric Marines are resources to be deployed, no different from ammunition or fuel. The sorcerers may remember who these warriors once were, but they did not know them as intimately as the Dreadnoughts did. The Dreadnoughts, however, remember everything. They remember when these Rubric Marines were living warriors with personalities and preferences. They remember the bonds of brotherhood that once connected them. They remember conversations held, battles fought together, moments of triumph and disaster shared. And now they must fight alongside the animated armor of their former brothers, watching them march into battle with mechanical precision, knowing that everything that made them who they were is gone forever, reduced to dust within sealed ceramite. This creates a constant source of renewed trauma. Every battle is a reminder of what was lost. Every time a Rubric Marine falls in combat, destroyed by enemy fire, the Dreadnought remembers the living warrior that armor once contained. The pain is not dulled by repetition, because the memories remain perfectly clear. Each loss resonates with the memory of the original person, creating a cascade of associated grief that would be crippling if the Dreadnought had any choice but to continue fighting. The Dreadnoughts also bear witness to the slow degradation of the few living sorcerers who survived the Rubric. They watch as the younger generations of Thousand Sons sorcerers, recruited from cult psychers across the galaxy, adopt the ways of the Legion, but lack the context to truly understand what was lost. These new sorcerers never knew Prospero before its burning. They never experienced brotherhood with living warriors, rather than dust-filled automatons. They have been raised in the twisted environment of the Eye of Terror, where Xienxia's influence is constant and overwhelming. To them, the current state of the Legion is simply how things are, not a tragic diminishment of what once was. The Dreadnoughts remember what once was with perfect clarity, and they can see how far the Legion has fallen. They are the only ones left who truly understand the magnitude of the tragedy, because they are the only ones who remember enough to comprehend what was lost. This knowledge isolates them even from their own Legion. They cannot share their memories in any meaningful way with the Rubric Marines, who have no consciousness to receive them. They cannot communicate the full weight of their experience to the living sorcerers, who lack the context to understand. They are alone with their memories, surrounded by the hollow echoes of a brotherhood that once meant everything to them. After the Rubric, the Thousand Sons faced a new problem. They could no longer create new Dreadnoughts from their own ranks. The Rubric Marines, reduced to dust within their armor, lacked the physical substance necessary to be interred in a Dreadnought sarcophagus. There simply was not enough organic matter left to sustain the connection between consciousness and machine. The surviving sorcerers possessed too much power and pride to consider volunteering for such a fate. In their view, being interred in a Dreadnought was not an honor, but a limitation, a cage that would prevent them from wielding their full psychic might. This created a practical problem for the Legion. Dreadnoughts remained valuable assets on the battlefield, and the few Osiran pattern contemptors that had survived from before the rubric could not last forever. Eventually, they would be destroyed in combat, or their ancient machinery would fail, or the psychometric barrier lattice would degrade beyond the ability of even the most skilled tech sorcerers to repair. The Legion needed new dreadnoughts, but they had no suitable candidates from within their own ranks. The solution they devised was as cruel as it was clever. The Thousand Sons began to lure warriors from other traitor legions with promises of knowledge and power. They would invite aspiring sorcerers to join them, offering tutelage in the mystical arts, access to forbidden tomes, and the opportunity to learn from some of the most powerful psychers in the galaxy. For Chaos Space Marines, seeking to increase their understanding of the warp and improve their psychic abilities, it seemed like an incredible opportunity. What these unfortunate souls did not realize was that they were not being recruited as sorcerers, but as raw material. The Thousand Sons would put them through a series of trials and rituals, each one ostensibly designed to test their worthiness and attune their souls to the mysteries of Tzeentch. In reality, these rituals were carefully crafted to bind the aspirant's consciousness to a hellbrute chassis, creating the necessary psychic connections while the candidate remained unaware of their true fate. Once the binding was complete, the Thousand Sons would reveal the deception. The would-be sorcerer would be stripped of his armor, his body reduced with warp flame in a process that left him as a burnt mass of organs, bones, and nerve fibers, still conscious and fully aware of what was happening to him. This reduced form would then be sealed in an amniotic sac and installed into the hellbrute, which would immediately activate its systems. The victim would awaken to find himself trapped in a walking tomb, transformed into the very thing he had likely heard tales of and pitied, a hellbrute driven mad by his imprisonment. Unlike the Osiran pattern contemptors that preserved consciousness and allowed for continued psychic ability, these hellbrutes offered no such mercy. The process of their creation was designed to induce maximum psychological trauma, transforming what might have been a promising sorcerer into a hate-filled engine of destruction. The Thousand Sons viewed this as an acceptable trade-off. They did not need their hellbrutes to be wise counselors or repositories of knowledge. They needed weapons, and weapons made from rage and madness served that purpose well enough. This practice, more than perhaps anything else, reveals the depths to which the Thousand Sons had fallen. The Legion that once prided itself on the pursuit of knowledge and the elevation of human consciousness, now engaged in deception and torture to create weapons of war. The irony would not be lost on the original Thousand Sons dreadnoughts, who remembered when their Legion operated under a code of honor, when Magnus himself would have been horrified by such cruelty. But what choice did they have? They were trapped in their own shells, unable to physically prevent what was happening even if they disagreed with it. They could offer counsel, could point out the moral bankruptcy of the practice, but they could not force the living sorcerers to listen. And in truth, many of the dreadnoughts had grown so weary, had endured so much over so many millennia, that they could no longer muster the emotional energy to object. They had seen so much cruelty, had participated in so many atrocities themselves, that one more horror added to the pile seemed almost insignificant. The hellbrutes created through this process existed in stark contrast to the Osiran dreadnoughts. Where the Osiran devices preserved consciousness and memory with crystalline clarity, the hellbrutes descended into madness within days or weeks of their creation. The pseudo-parasitic nature of the hellbrute sarcophagus, combined with the warp taint inherent in its construction, subjected the pilot to an agony-racked waking nightmare. Between battles, the hellbrutes had to be restrained and stripped of their weapons, lest they attack their own allies in fits of rage. They were kept in special chambers, surrounded by wards to contain their fury, while demons pressed against the barriers trying to possess them or drive them further into madness. This treatment of the hellbrutes provided another source of pain for the conscious dreadnoughts. They could see these newer walkers as corrupted reflections of what they themselves might have become had Magnus not created the Osiren device. They recognized that, but for their Primarch's genius, they might be the ones chained in darkness between battles, slowly losing their sanity to the corrosive influence of the warp. This created a complex emotional response. Gratitude for being spared such a fate, mixed with guilt for not suffering as much as the Hellbrutes, mixed with horror at what was being done to create these tortured machines. The contrast between the Osiren Dreadnoughts' preserved consciousness and the Hellbrutes' madness also highlighted the fundamental cruelty of the Dreadnoughts' situation. The Hellbrutes, in their insanity, at least did not fully comprehend what had happened to them. Their madness provided a kind of escape, a retreat from full awareness of their condition. But the Osiren Dreadnoughts had no such escape. They understood completely what they had become and what they had lost. They could analyze their situation with perfect clarity, could recognize the tragedy of their existence, and could do absolutely nothing to change it. In some ways, their preserved sanity was a greater curse than the Hellbrutes' madness. The existence of both types of walking tomb within the Thousand Suns also created a strange dynamic in battle. The Hellbrutes would charge forward in berserk fury, weapons blazing, caring nothing for tactics or strategy beyond the immediate satisfaction of destroying enemies. The Osiren Dreadnoughts would advance with calculated precision, their movements guided by millennia of tactical knowledge and perfect memory of past engagements. They would watch the Hellbrutes with something that might have been pity if they had any emotional capacity left for such feelings, seeing in those rage-filled charges a kind of freedom they themselves would never know. 10,000 years is an incomprehensibly long time. For mortal humans, it is the entire span of recorded history, and then some. For normal Space Marine dreadnoughts, it is a period punctuated by long sleeps and interrupted by the gradual erosion of memory, so that 10,000 years becomes more like a series of disconnected vignettes than a continuous narrative. But for the Thousand Suns dreadnoughts, with their psychometric barrier lattices intact, it has been 10,000 years of uninterrupted consciousness, every moment recorded and preserved with perfect fidelity. Consider what this means in terms of accumulated knowledge. The Thousand Suns dreadnoughts have fought in more battles than most Space Marines will fight in a dozen lifetimes. They have seen the tactics and strategies of every major faction in the galaxy evolve over millennia. They have observed the rise and fall of empires, watched as specific enemy commanders developed their own styles and then trained successors who modified those styles. They have witnessed technological innovation on both sides of various conflicts, seen new weapons developed and new countermeasures implemented in response. All of this information is stored in their memories with perfect clarity. They can recall specific engagement zones on worlds that have long since been destroyed, remember the exact composition of enemy forces from battles fought 5,000 years ago, analyze in detail the effectiveness of various strategies across dozens or hundreds of similar situations. They are, in essence, living tactical databases, repositories of military knowledge that no written archive could match. The sheer volume of information they contain would be valuable beyond measure if it could be extracted and analyzed. But herein lies another element of their tragedy. Much of this knowledge is effectively useless. The galaxy has changed dramatically over 10,000 years. Tactics that were effective during the Horus Heresy may be obsolete now. Worlds that were crucial strategic assets have been destroyed or abandoned. Entire alien races that the dreadnoughts remember fighting have been driven to extinction or fled to unknown corners of the galaxy. The dreadnoughts carry in their memories detailed information about a universe that no longer exists, alongside equally detailed information about the universe that replaced it and the universe that replaced that, layer upon layer of accumulated knowledge about places and things that have ceased to matter. Yet they cannot forget any of it. The information remains in their memories with the same clarity as more recent and relevant knowledge. They must mentally sort through millennia of data every time they try to recall something specific, navigating through vast archives of memory to find the pieces that are still pertinent to current circumstances. This cognitive burden would be exhausting for any mind, but the psychometric barrier lattice keeps their consciousness sharp enough to handle it, ensuring that they never get the relief of confusion or forgetfulness. The Thousand Suns. Dreadnoughts have also accumulated something else over 10,000 years, a perfect understanding of futility. They have seen the same patterns repeat over and over, have watched as schemes that seemed brilliant and complex ultimately led to the same outcomes. They have observed how Tzeentch's grand plans invariably lead to more chaos and change, rather than any definable end state. They understand, with the clarity that only perfect memory can bring, that the long war is truly endless, that there is no victory condition that will ever be met, no final triumph that will allow them to rest. This understanding would normally lead to despair or resignation, but the Dreadnoughts have long since passed through those stages. After thousands of years, even despair becomes routine. They continue to fight, not because they believe it will lead anywhere, but because fighting is what they do, what they have always done, what they remember doing for their entire conscious existence. The war has become its own justification, requiring no external meaning or purpose. They fight because they are fighters, because the alternative is to simply cease functioning, and some deep core of identity that has survived 10,000 years of trauma and memory will not allow them to simply give up. There is also the matter of their service to Tzeentch to consider. The chaos god of change and sorcery is not a straightforward patron. He does not demand blind obedience or mindless slaughter like Horn. He does not offer the simple pleasures of excess like Slaanesh, nor the grim satisfaction of spreading disease like Nurgle. Instead, Tzeentch trades in schemes and plots, complex webs of causality where the true purpose of any action is hidden beneath layers of deception. The Thousand Suns Dreadnoughts, with their perfect memories and accumulated knowledge, can sometimes perceive patterns in Tzeentch's machinations that younger sorcerers miss. They can remember when similar schemes were enacted centuries or millennia ago, can recall the outcomes and the secondary effects, can trace connections across vast spans of time that would be invisible to those without their depth of experience. This makes them valuable assets in the great game of chaos, but it also deepens their understanding of just how completely they are being manipulated. They can see that Tzeentch does not care about the Thousand Suns except as pieces on an infinite game board. They understand that every victory they win, every scheme they advance, every battle they fight, is not moving them toward any goal except the perpetuation of change itself. They know, with the certainty that comes from having watched it happen over and over, that Tzeentch will betray them just as readily as he aids them if it serves his purposes. And they know they will continue to serve anyway, because what else is there for them to do? This knowledge creates a unique form of spiritual exhaustion. The Dreadnoughts cannot muster true faith in Tzeentch because they have too much experience with his capricious nature. They cannot rebel against him because they have witnessed the fate of those who try. They cannot find meaning in their service because they understand too well the futility of trying to impose meaning on chaos. They exist in a state of weary continuation, too experienced to believe, but too trapped to stop. The few original Thousand Suns Dreadnoughts who survived from before the rubric occupy a special position within the Legion's remnants. They are the oldest living witnesses to the Legion's history, the only ones left who can remember with perfect clarity what the Thousand Suns were before their fall. The younger sorcerers, those recruited after the heresy, often seek them out when they have questions about the Legion's past, hoping to learn from those who were actually there. But these conversations are often unsatisfying for both parties. The Dreadnoughts remember too much, can provide too much detail, overwhelming their questioners with information about a time and place that no longer exists. They can describe the layout of libraries on Prospero with perfect accuracy, can list the titles of books that were destroyed 10,000 years ago, can name warriors who were reduced to dust in the rubric, and describe their personalities in exhaustive detail, But this information, while technically accurate, does not convey what it felt like to be part of the Thousand Suns before the fall. The emotional reality of that brotherhood, the sense of shared purpose and mutual respect that existed before betrayal and tragedy reshaped everything, cannot be transmitted through mere facts and details. The younger sorcerers often come away from these conversations more confused than enlightened. They wanted wisdom, guidance, perhaps inspiration from the ancient warriors. Instead, they received a data dump of historical information delivered with the mechanical precision of a cogitator. They cannot understand that the Dreadnoughts are not being deliberately unhelpful. The ancient warriors simply have no framework for distinguishing between important memories and trivial ones anymore. After 10,000 years of perfect recall, everything is equally significant and equally meaningless. Some of the original Dreadnoughts have tried to serve as historians, attempting to compile comprehensive records of the Legion's past, while their memories remain intact. They have worked with scribes and data looms to create vast archives, documenting every battle, every warrior, every significant event they can recall. These archives are impressive in their scope and detail, stretching across thousands of data slates and occupying entire sections of the libraries aboard Thousand Suns fleet vessels. But these archival projects ultimately provide little satisfaction to the Dreadnoughts themselves. Recording their memories externally does not lighten the burden of carrying them internally. They still remember everything with perfect clarity, whether it has been written down or not. And they understand that these archives, no matter how comprehensive, will never be truly complete. There is simply too much to record, too many details and nuances, too much context that depends on having actually been present for events, rather than just reading about them later. The archives become another monument to futility, an attempt to make meaning out of memory that ultimately changes nothing. The psychological impact of carrying 10,000 years of perfect memory, while simultaneously understanding that those memories mean less and less as time passes, creates a peculiar form of existential crisis. The Dreadnoughts cannot forget who they were, but they are increasingly isolated from anyone who shares that identity. They cannot move forward because their consciousness is too anchored in perfect recall of the past. They cannot find peace because every moment of rest is filled with memories that remain as vivid and demanding of attention as the present moment. This state of affairs would be traumatic enough if it were stable, but it is not. The Thousand Suns Dreadnoughts exist within the Eye of Terror, where the barrier between the material universe and the warp is thin to the point of non-existence. They are constantly exposed to the raw stuff of chaos, to psychic emanations that twist reality and reshape perception. The psychometric barrier lattice protects their consciousness from the worst of this corruption, but it cannot shield them completely. They are aware of the warp pressing against their minds at all times, feel the attention of demons and greater powers brushing against their consciousness, know that their continued sanity is maintained only through constant psychic discipline. This creates yet another layer of exhaustion. Normal Dreadnoughts can retreat into sleep, into blessed unconsciousness, where the universe ceases to matter for a time. The Thousand Suns. Dreadnoughts have no such escape. Even when placed in stasis, their consciousness remains active enough to perceive the warp, to experience its invasive presence, to resist its corrupting influence. They are always on guard, always defending the borders of their own minds, always aware that a moment of weakness could mean possession or worse. The strain of maintaining this defense for 10,000 years should have broken them long ago. That it has not speaks to the incredible mental discipline instilled in Thousand Suns sorcerers during their training, a discipline that even the trauma of interment and the passage of millennia has not eroded. But this strength comes at a cost. The energy required to maintain constant psychic vigilance leaves little room for emotional processing or psychological healing. The Dreadnoughts endure because they must, but they do not recover. They accumulate damage, trauma layered upon trauma, with no opportunity for genuine rest or repair. Some observers might argue that the Thousand Suns dreadnoughts have at least been spared one horror that afflicts normal dreadnoughts: the terror of waking up to find that everyone they knew is dead, that their entire chapter has changed beyond recognition, that they are strangers in what should be their own home. After all, the Thousand Suns dreadnoughts remember everything clearly, so they should always know exactly where they are in time, who is still alive, and what has changed. But this argument misses a crucial point. The Thousand Suns dreadnoughts do experience this horror. They experience it constantly. Every time they interact with the Legion as it currently exists, they are confronted with the enormous gulf between what they remember and what is. Every conversation with a rubric Marine that does not respond with personality or wit reminds them of the living warrior that armor once contained. Every strategic discussion with a sorcerer who never knew Prospero reinforces their isolation. Every battle fought in service to Tzeentch echoes with memories of when they fought for the Emperor, creating a dissonance that never resolves. They are not spared the horror of displacement in time. They simply experience it perpetually, unable to forget what was or adapt to what is, trapped in an eternal comparison between past and present that can never favor the present. The curse of perfect memory also manifests in more intimate ways. The Thousand Suns dreadnoughts remember conversations with brothers who have been dead for thousands of years. They can recall jokes told, stories shared, moments of camaraderie that defined their relationships. But unlike normal humans, who experience these memories as bittersweet remnants of something lost, the dreadnoughts experience them with the same emotional intensity as when they originally occurred. The laughter of a brother dead for 5 millennia sounds as clear in their memory as if it happened yesterday. The warmth of fellowship from before the heresy feels as real as any current experience. This creates a form of emotional torture where the past constantly intrudes on the present, not as gentle nostalgia, but as raw, immediate sensation. The dreadnoughts cannot compartmentalize their memories or relegate them to the status of things that happened long ago. Everything is now, everything is immediate, everything demands the same level of emotional engagement. They are simultaneously experiencing their entire 10,000-year history at once, a cacophony of memory that would be overwhelming if they had any choice but to endure it. And yet, despite all of this suffering, despite 10,000 years of perfect memory and accumulated trauma, the Thousand Suns dreadnoughts continue. They wake when called, fight when directed, offer counsel when asked. They do not break, do not surrender, do not allow themselves to be destroyed, except in battle. Something in them, some core of identity or purpose, or simple stubborn refusal to yield, keeps them functioning decade after decade, century after century, millennium after millennium. Perhaps this is the ultimate tragedy of their existence. It would be easier if they could simply break, if the weight of memory and time could finally crush them and grant them the peace of oblivion. But the psychometric barrier lattice keeps them functional, keeps their consciousness stable and clear, denying them even that final escape. They are doomed not just to remember, but to continue, to persist in full awareness of what they have become and what they have lost. The Thousand Suns dreadnoughts represent something unique in the grim darkness of the far future. They are not heroes, not in any conventional sense. They are not villains either, at least not entirely. They are witnesses, trapped observers forced to watch and remember as the galaxy burns around them and their own legion slowly decays into something unrecognizable. They are monuments to the cruelty of Tzeentch, examples of how even gifts can become curses, how preservation can become a form of destruction. They are also, in their own way, proof of the resilience of consciousness. The fact that they have endured for 10,000 years without forgetting or breaking demonstrates that the human mind, even transformed and enhanced and encased in metal, possesses a stubborn strength that transcends physical form. They have been broken in every way that matters, and yet they persist, not because persistence brings any reward or satisfaction, but because the alternative is incomprehensible to them. For a Space Marine dreadnought, memory is supposed to be a comfort, a link to the past that provides context and meaning to the present. For the Thousand Suns dreadnoughts, memory is a prison more secure than any fortress, more inescapable than any cage. They cannot forget. They cannot move on. They cannot find peace. They can only remember and endure and continue to serve in a war that has no end and no purpose beyond its own continuation. This is their curse, their gift, their punishment, and their duty. They are the dreadnoughts of the Thousand Suns, and they will never stop remembering. The galaxy grinds on, indifferent to individual suffering. The long war continues, consuming worlds and lives without mercy or pause. And within their walking tombs, behind psychometric barrier lattices that preserve their consciousness with terrible fidelity, the ancient warriors of the Thousand Suns remember everything. Every loss, every failure, every moment of their 10,000-year existence, clear and vivid and impossible to escape. They are not the honored ancestors of a proud chapter, dispensing wisdom from the comfortable haze of faded memory. They are not the rage-filled monsters that other traitor legions field, their madness granting them escape from full awareness of their condition. They are something worse, perfectly aware, completely conscious, unable to forget or be forgotten by their own psychically enhanced minds. In a universe of endless horror and suffering, where death comes in countless forms and mercy is a rare commodity, the Thousand Suns dreadnoughts have found a fate that stands out even in that catalogue of nightmares. They have been granted the curse of perfect memory, and they will carry that curse for as long as their ancient machinery continues to function, for as long as the war continues, for as long as Tzeentch finds them useful in his incomprehensible schemes. They never stop remembering. They cannot stop remembering. And that, perhaps, is the most terrible fate that can befall any warrior in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war and the laughter of thirsting gods echoes through the void. In the end, the Thousand Suns dreadnoughts remind us that there are fates worse than death. There are prisons more secure than any cell. There are torments more refined than any physical pain. To remember everything, to forget nothing, to carry the full weight of 10,000 years of loss and failure and sorrow with perfect clarity, unable to share it or set it down or find even temporary relief in the fog of fading memory. This is a curse that makes death seem like a blessing. And still they fight, still they serve, still they endure, because they are Thousand Suns, and they cannot forget what it means to be loyal, even when that loyalty has been twisted into service to powers they once would have died fighting. Because they are Space Marines, bred and trained and conditioned to never surrender, never falter, never stop until they are destroyed. Because they are consciousness trapped in metal shells, and consciousness, once awakened, does not know how to simply choose to end. They are the ancient ones who never stopped remembering, the witnesses who can never close their eyes, the prisoners in tombs of their own perfect memory. If you've enjoyed delving into the grimdark tragedy of the Thousand Suns dreadnoughts, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are countless more horrors and wonders to explore in the vast universe of Warhammer 40,000, and I'll be here to guide you through them all. Until next time, remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, some things are never forgotten.